Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. Welcome once again to teissTalk. It is the last one of November. And as usual, we have got a wonderful conversation lined up for you, along with a wonderful set of guests, of whom we'll be coming to very soon. A couple of house notices. First of all, do not forget that we still have another episode next week. It'll be the last one of the year. I'll give you details of those at the end. And secondly, if you're wondering what to get your beloved spouse for Christmas this year, well, if you ask a question today or next week, you could be in the running for a teissTalk mug. And what better gift could you put under the tree for your loved one this year? So please do ask us questions. Go to the chat at the bottom, make sure it's marked to everyone, and then you can ask us a question. And the funniest, the most intriguing, the one that makes us most feel uncomfortable, or potentially the only one, will win a mug this week. Also, welcome to our listeners on LinkedIn. If you are joining us on LinkedIn and you want to win a mug, you will have to head over to teissTalk.co.uk/teissTalk and log in there and join us there so that you can ask a question. Otherwise, sit back, relax, but you won't be in the running for a gift for Christmas. So without further ado, let's move on, shall we? Let's bring onto the stage our guests. Can I welcome Mike, Alan, and Josh? Hello, Alan.
Good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon, listener.
Hello, Josh.
Hello, Tom. Hello, everyone.
And hello, Mike.
Hey, Tom. Hey, folks.
And this week we have Josh to thank for our tea and biscuits. He's our sponsor this week. So thank you very much, Josh, and to Fortra for sponsoring this episode. But let's move straight on, shall we? Let's get into our news item, and it's from our friends at the Groniad Guardian, and it is Russia plotting to use AI to enhance cyber attacks against UK Minister Will Warren. Now, I'm feeling maybe a little bit cynical, but this comes somewhat from, you know, the school of the bleeding obvious, isn't it? I mean, Russia's already attacking us; it's attacking everybody. So why should we be getting more concerned right now about Russia using AI, or in fact any country or any threat actor?
Yeah, I had a look at the article, and I had a similar groan when I saw AI in the title because, having come from a technical background but worked in product marketing, AI is overused and used irresponsibly in a lot of messaging. But I also so hey, maybe they're jumping on a bit of that hype and using the AI message to get people to pay more attention, sit up and point to that they're going to get more advanced because, I haven't really seen any huge uses of AI in offensive security beyond social engineering use cases. And that was actually reflected in the article. If you read, they said, they haven't seen Russia using it yet. It's more something still to come.
I mean, the warning came from the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Now, I thought the Duchy of Lancaster made biscuits for Waitrose, but maybe I'm getting the duchies confused here. But
no, the Duchy of Lancaster links to actually back to the Tudor Wars and
really?
the Wars of the Roses. And I think it was the winning duchy is Lancaster. And actually, I think my brethren in the RAF regiment, when they toast the monarch, actually still toast the Duke of Lancaster rather than the King or Queen. So it's a historical thing. But in this sense, Pat McFadden, with that responsibility, he's the Minister of State at the Cabinet Office level who has responsibility for national security. And the conference he was addressing was a cyber conference in London. So he was opening it as the keynote. I'm with you both so far in terms of groaning when you see AI. Look, I'm a former IBMer. I always go, when you say AI, what do you mean? Do you mean machine learning? Do you mean deductive reasoning? Or do you actually mean artificial intelligence? But I think we're back into this we're into this buzz phrase. It's a buzz phrase of the moment. So it's absolutely to get attention. But it's interesting that a minister of state in a fairly new, in fact, it is a new government in the UK sense, is recognizing that. So if you think about his instructions to his speechwriter, because he won't have written that speech, it will have been presented to him. They're looking for things that are fresh.
They're
And,
looking for levers to pull.
absolutely, and and there's no question that AI is an innovation piece that we've got to look at, and certainly when we look forward, it's only going to have a greater effect. But I think, as Josh has already said, at the moment it's difficult to evidence where it's actually being used. But some of that, of course, is because where it is actually being used is probably in those areas where open source intelligence doesn't have the best penetration. So, as usual with these things, it will come out in the wash when we look back. We won't necessarily see the true indicators of it at the time.
Because I'm sorry, Josh, do go on.
Go ahead. As you say, it is likely to be the stuff of nation states, though, if anyone is to kind of crack the AI and cybersecurity kind of combination for like the building complex attacks. But so far, I've just seen those little uses of like maybe using it to build malware, and it's not all that advanced malware. It's kind of the average code is kind of what AI does when it looks at the sum of all the data it has. It tends to pick the middle, which is at the average space. But yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think it's encouraging us to look at advanced threats, but then maybe the message is, hey, let's do basic security well. I think we've seen that a lot with its conversation around AI when they released the secure deployment for AI models. I jumped into that thinking, wow, I'm going to learn loads of new stuff. And it was basic DevSecOps principles. And so I think using these novel, exciting threats is probably the best way to remind us, hey, start with the basics. And that's going to also address these advanced threats too.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue with the article as well, though. It puts too much weight in the AI. Like the Russians were already attacking us, they are already a credible threat actor. I think by going, oh, they've got AI now, they're a bigger threat, is negating the fact that they've always been a threat and they will continue to be a threat, regardless of the technology, like the technology increase. It will be, I think it's just the fact that people go, oh, well, now they've got AI, we need to worry. No, you should always have been doing it. And even if it's not the Russians, it could be a random script kiddie. It could be, a political group. They don't need AI to cause harm or disruption. It's the new trend. So I think that's the unfortunate thing with that.
And unsurprisingly, we've been talking about it a lot on teissTalk. AI comes in, probably every other week to one degree or another, or almost every week someone mentions it. But one of the panelists, I think it was Lee Munson from the ISF forum, was very clear that AI's time is yet to come. It's not. This is nascent stages. It's not really having a massive impact. But what it is doing right now is lowering that barrier to entry for many people. So, Josh, you made mention about it's not going to spit out. It's not going to create advanced malware campaigns, but it's going to allow people to launch malware campaigns, albeit at a sort of lower degree. Alan.
Yeah, look, I was just wanted to echo your point about lowering the bar of entry. In fact, I read on a LinkedIn post this morning, Chris Roberts posted around the ease of cloning. And he made the point that things that took really wiggly amps, you needed to know what you were doing. It took some time compared to what he was able to do today with some stuff that came through in mail order in a couple of days. He just hooked it all together.
Yeah.
And because he had the right code in GitHub, but it's available elsewhere, he was able to just do it. And that, I think, is probably the biggest danger that comes with AI in the loose sense, is it's no longer just in the hands of the few. It's and I'm going to use an old term. It's absolutely commoditization. Peter Herzog made a good point in an article he wrote a couple of days ago that I reposted. That's, I think, the worry, because we're still chasing, to Josh's point, actually, we're still chasing the basics. I work with a lot of small and medium businesses, and to them, security beyond firewalls and antivirus, what are you talking about? And I'm being slightly simplistic, but not very, actually, in some cases. So we're still chasing the basics, whilst the the bad actors, the threat actors,
Yeah.
they've got far more options in their armory than they've ever had. And I guess I would just push against, we kind of automatically go to nation states at the top of the threats tree.
Yeah.
I've not been a proponent of that for some time. I kind of go with money is a really big motivator.
Yeah.
And organized crime have a lot of money, and they have access to people that some of them they have quite literally groomed from teenage years to become their in-house hackers. And of course, there's always a physical coercion threat, and and that's what turns the insider threat into something real, because we're all looking for something online, and we neglect the fact that somebody's got tapped up at home and pressured to do something that opens the door. Sorry, I'm perhaps getting a little bit off topic, but I'm just conscious of it's not all about technology, and and it seems to be getting easier and easier for the bad guys and girls, and yet we're still struggling on the defender side. And I think that's something that we've got to get better at.
It's a bit of a curse of the position, though, isn't it? That we are on the defensive side. We have to go second. We're always kind of reacting to some degree, and definitely we can talk about proactive ways to kind of approaches to security in a bit. But the focus in that article is on critical infrastructure, and I think that there may be, you talk about the physical stuff. There's obviously your physical warfare, but it's probably a grey, murky area people are going to rather operate in is in the cyber warfare. And to your someone made the point earlier, that's been going on for ages. As long as there's been cybercrime, there's probably been a level of cyber warfare. But that article was leveled at critical infrastructure, and to reinforce, or that message rather, from the minister, and to reinforce why that's important or why that's needed. I was reading today from the CISA, so the US government body, had done some penetration testing, red team exercises on their critical infrastructure bodies, and the results were pretty scathing. They managed to get in using a backdoor that had been installed by the previous penetration testers, so it hadn't even been addressed. And they're going to give them a whole report of how they got in, and they should have remediated that. And the other thing they said was that they detected us, but they didn't respond quick enough, and then kind of let us be. And there was too much emphasis on endpoint security, and maybe the perceived visible threats that we work on our laptops and workstations. We see maybe our alert pop up when we click on a dodgy link and malware was drawn in. So that tends to be still where there's too much focus, in my opinion, on kind of endpoint centric security solutions.
I think it's interesting. Talking about critical national infrastructure, we're looking at OT devices as well, and some of these OT devices are, a legacy. I mean, a lot of the core infrastructure for the country is running on legacy, outdated systems that are either hard to implement more security features, costly, or it's too big of a project, or there'd be too much downtime. So it's that weird balancing act where there's a problem, you can do the best you can, but again, a bad guy only has to be right once. You've got to be right every time, and it's that it must be quite a difficult position to be in when you can't, as you say, deploy endpoint security and have another blinky box tell you that all your critical national infrastructure is safe. But yeah, I don't think it works like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I think maybe the way that I told that story, because it's a bit shocking when you read that the first way method of entry, but we shouldn't be blaming people, because to your point there, that the blue team, they are something is gonna slip through now, and it's about having that resilience in place to detect something and respond to it, no matter how later on in the attack sequence you might have caught it. Earlier the better, absolutely, but if we can still catch something before it gets to the actions and objectives, the data exfiltration, or the whatever the goal might be, it's definitely worthwhile.
And Josh, I want to pick up on that, but as we segue very smoothly into the panel proper here, you're talking about there's often too much emphasis on the endpoint or the human on the end here. We're talking about transforming security operations to detect and respond to advanced attacks, which are probably in many cases, well, will they avoid the endpoint in these advanced level attacks, or will they just actually emphasize that attack on the endpoint, and to Alan's point earlier, actually target individuals focusing on their weak points?
Sure. And I think I might have a question for Alan, maybe after my bit, about how he balances out the security in different areas as a VC. So, but I think it's not saying endpoint is not a place to look at, but it's it's don't over pivot your security strategy. You know, these threats are diverse, and they're basically going to look for nation states have the most complex capabilities or most advanced capabilities, but they are going to obviously choose the path of least resistance and go for where they think they have the best chance of getting in. And sometimes that's an incredibly simple attack. So it's about making sure you have a balance of security controls. You're taking data from everything, your IoT, like Mike said, your cloud, your network, you're doing deep packet inspection as well as log ingest. You've got security controls you're monitoring and collecting those in one place because you don't really know where it's going to matter, not just relying on, hey, if they get to the endpoint, we'll kind of catch them there and block them there, because they might be very quiet, or they might circumvent endpoint controls altogether when they get to that stage. So Alan, how do you kind of balance that the security strategy so that it is diverse enough to kind of tackle these threats?
Without getting too simplistic, I try to remind people that it's not all about technology. Cyber, having been one of the who was in the initial resistant camp to using the term 15 plus years ago.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably, in fact, it might even be closer to 20 odd years ago when cyber came in. Actually, I seem to remember going to IAO 6 in Brighton, and we were resisting the use of cyber as opposed to information security. Anyway, history. But my point here is cyber is not just the security of IT. So Mike made a good point. It's about OT, it's about operational technology. It's about Internet of Things. It's not just about the computers in front of us. And that point sometimes gets lost.
And those things including human beings.
Well, and then I go technology, process, and people. And I generally end the conversation on don't forget the people. We're talking about detection and response in terms of security operation. The technology is there all the time, and the technology gives us consistency, gives us quality, gives us coverage. But when the proverbial hits the fan, the tech just does what it does. You might extend the logging to get more logging, or you might reach into your offline logging to look back, but actually it's the people who step up. And I think one of the challenges we've got at the moment, certainly that I've seen over 20 years as a practitioner, is the frequency of incidents is getting closer and closer. There are multiple times now when I've gone into a client either in response to an incident or as part of proactive, and we've increased their detection capability, and we found more than one set of footprints, because that happens, because the chances are that if there is a backdoor or more than one backdoor, given the amount of scanning and exploitation activity that's going on, the chances are if one attacker's got in, they may not be the only attacker that's got in.
You even see
it's actually quite.
They patch it behind them, don't
well,
they?
I was about to say, and actually, I've seen attackers harden their target system to stop somebody else getting in whilst they are in. And it's actually almost at that point that I think we could really do with harnessing that sort of capability. And I know you get into an ethical because you're paying the bad guy, but the greater good. I probably shouldn't say this, but I am a subscriber to Machiavelli's "the end justifies the means." If the end state is the client is in a better state, how we get them to that point, there is an element of it's the end that matters.
If we can just get the burglars to tidy up a little bit and run the Hoover over, everybody would be happy.
Well, and the insurance guys will pick up the tab, won't they?
Wake up to a nice clean house. I wonder if in the example of
nice clean empty house.
Please don't quote me on that. And I'm conscious this is a broadcast.
But I wonder. I mean, to that point, I wonder if red team has started to take that more purple team approach and patch as they attacked.
So only Tuesday this week, I was up doing a strategy workshop. It's one of the reasons why I was in Liverpool. So we were having a conversation before, weren't we? And it was dry, by the way, for anybody who thinks it's always raining up there. We were having a strategy discussion about what to do, and we were talking about penetration testing and next stage. And the client on their list of things that they were thinking about doing had red teaming. And actually, to be fair to them, they had red teaming to help the blue team get better.
Right.
And I said to them, okay, I like that, but let's stop talking about the red team, because the red team are always going to succeed. That's not the objective. The objective is to help the blue team and everybody else get better. So could we perhaps think about adopting the purple team label? Because that's where you draw all elements of the enterprise and their third parties into the game. because that's what I'm finding in terms of incident response exercises. People are beginning to recognize, yeah, they need to have their security operations people, they need to have their gold execs schooled in crisis management, but too few of them are calling on their lawyers, their insurers, their marketing and communications people, and not just saying, okay, we need to put a communique out and marketing are going to do that, but actually asking marketing to produce the template that they're going to use such that the communique is ready within 15 minutes of the decision to go public. That sort of thing is still too much of a reach for a lot of outfits. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that, given we're 2024 going into 2025. That's not a new lesson. And I do worry about how many people that's the first time they've heard it.
I think the red versus two pieces, the red versus blue piece is quite an important one as well, because in an ideal scenario, an internal security operations team really shouldn't be responding to that many incidents. If you're burning through and dealing with such a volume of incidents, then there's a systemic issue that, you need to look further down the pipeline and fix it. But it also means that other than, phishing emails or users clicking things that they definitely shouldn't have done, you're not in that same example of you're not dealing with, sophisticated attacks every day. So having that red versus blue, it gives the team really great hands-on experience to even understand things that they'd not normally get that opportunity to, but that builds to your detection and response capabilities because you've not got analysts that have never seen, someone moving laterally using a novel exploit. And if you're in that environment in a live fire situation and all of a sudden it's happening, you've not got that same sort of conditioning. So I think it's a huge piece to not only find the vulnerabilities and mitigate them beforehand, but for that enrichment for your team as well, and to build on that. Because again, you might run a really sophisticated exercise and go, well, actually, our IR process just doesn't work for this, or there's escalations in place, or we should have done A, X, B, and Z beforehand. But yeah, I think it's quite it's enrichment for everyone.
Well, and I think that's where we start to get some data around that will allow us to measure effectiveness, that will allow us to assess both at a team level, but also at an individual level, capability and competence, such that we can then identify training needs, such that we get better. And that's kind of why I like the purple label, because it puts that emphasis on the whole thing. It's not just how effective were our detective controls, did our response capability get us to the point where we were responding within the time to contain the incident and get it better. Those are quite operational metrics. But if you think about why we're doing this, and I'm going to use the resilient word just to introduce another buzzword into this conversation, that's actually what the business are looking for us to deliver, is resilience, so that they can continue doing whatever it is the business does in terms of output, relatively free from interference. After all, that's the definition of security. That's the objective we're after. So anything that allows us to both give confidence, to reassure, frankly, given the time of year, boost our business budget cases as to why we've got to have more money thrown at us so we can do our continuous improvement. We shouldn't miss opportunities.
I quite like that resilience buzzword, though, to the contrast to maybe the overuse of AI. I think I want to see more resilience because they found a nice way to say what we as cyber professionals have always known, but has been maybe a dirty phrase to say to less technical people or board members, that compromise is inevitable. Right. And so resilience represents that you can withstand attacks, but also you're going to get knocked down. And it's about having a plan to catch that, identify when you're being impacted and mitigate it, contain it, and get standing back up again. So I think resilience has really brought that, and seeing that in legislation like the DORA, the Digital Operations Resiliency Act, the EU stuff, has been really great to see, because I think it's made that perception more acceptable. Whereas historically, maybe we put too much effort in mitigation or blocking things, and maybe that's where the endpoint centric attitude comes, kind of block stuff on the endpoint, because that's where my guys are clicking on dodgy email links. And Mike, something to what you said, like we introduced the people kind of process piece of this, and you talked a lot about how to make them better, to kind of give them those scenarios that they might not see so that they're ready for it. And I come from a background of working in managed security. So we had thousands of customers at any one given time, and it was a large SOC, but you really got to cut your teeth in the best possible way, because there was never a dull moment. And, those false positives were common. They're the necessary evil for monitoring. But also we had to try and find that fine balance, because if you've got 1,000 customers, they might all need your attention at any one given time. So balancing that. So I think I want to ask, how do you kind of maintain the interest or the kind of the momentum in your blue team? Because I feel like so many people these days want to be a red teamer. They think it's more glamorous. They like I know a guy who tests Aston Martins, and he makes everyone want to be a penetration tester and hack into cars. But yeah, I think blue team is more important, and maybe that a lot of people turning there because they're burnt out of the blue stuff. It's thankless. I don't know.
I think that is the risk as well. And I think when you are, for lack of a better phrase, churning alerts, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, it can become quite, I'd say, but boring. I think, for lack of a better word. So I think constant, constant development is key. And again, you don't want, you might have a stock analyst that enjoys the detection and response side, looking at the queries, tuning them, building them. It's building that into, I mean, I prefer to think of it as a cyber fusion center. I think having a traditional security operations center that's then passing it on to your IR team or consulting with a CTI team is a little bit of a legacy. I think having that cyber fusion center where you've got a team doing the analysis, they then move into that incident response cycle when things have escalated, and also doing the CTI around it. I think that really helps, because you've not got a level 1 analyst who's just passing tickets to a level 2 because they've closed out the users confirmed, they clicked this link, it's safe, let's just close it out. And I think that's the key to keep people interested. But you also don't want people to get stagnant in their career progression either. And I think as soon as someone becomes stagnant, you could have the best SOC analyst on the planet, but if they know that there's no headroom or they're not going to grow, they're going to look for opportunities, which means you're in that huge deficit of, well, we've now got to either find someone with the same experience, which, bringing them into an organization, they're already at a disadvantage, even if they've got, 20 years experience, because they don't know your environment. And then you've also got the piece of, okay, but we're now out a very, very capable member of the team. So I think it's just that constant enrichment.
But surely we just deal with that churn of people by advertising for more entry-level positions with 5 years experience required, right?
And then putting hiring freezes.
Yeah, and hire exactly.
Can I pick up that red rag and run with it, Tom?
I'll just jump it your way,
Well, because unfortunately, I think there's a valid point that you're making here. Unfortunately, I had an ask from somebody that we know yesterday to see whether we can take on whether we got any internment options, and we don't currently, but we will have. But I think this is where you need to look at the challenge for small and medium business, because to develop the sort of thing Mike is looking for, you've got to have a fairly sizable team, not one or two people. If you're going to run a 24/7 SOC, you're kind of looking at a minimum of 11 people to run a shift system 24/7, 365. 2 on each shift, 4 shifts, plus some people to cover training, leave, and absences. Somebody to manage it.
2 people per shift, right?
And that's just 2 people.
Yeah.
And those 2 people have a limit as to how many tickets or customers they can work with at any one time.
Yeah.
And there becomes a finite limitation on the human piece. And this is kind of where I get a little bit idealistic stroke hopeful, which is unusual for me. But I do have a hope that the developing automation capabilities that are coming to market that properly move us into the world of SOAR, security operations and automated response, which we've been talking about for 5 years and more. I'm sure I've been on a TICE program before where we've talked about that, and we talked about it aspirationally, but I think that capability is now with us, which is why we've seen the rise of EDR to MDR to XDR. And I'm kind of thinking, well, isn't that just good SOC services? and perhaps I'm just being a bit anti-marketing here, but there's an element here of we're not reinventing the wheel. We've now got some access to capabilities that we've always wanted, but the limiting factor is still people. And I think this is where there's a real opportunity for managed security service providers to provide a service to multiple clients, because those clients can't afford the investment of people, tech, and process that they need to defend their digital business. That's the opportunity. And I'm on a roll, Tom. We need to take a lesson from the bad threat actors, because they have really commoditized what they do. they have different groups which are good at different things, and they work together. They don't try and do it all them. Well, some, not all of them, don't try and do everything together. Some of them do the reconnaissance. Some of them do the break-in. Some of them do the exploitation. Some of them do the information peddling afterwards. And I think, we need to disrupt that activity, by the way. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think we should take a leaf out of their good, because arguably their managed services are better than too many of our own on the defending side.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the issues, because I think a lot of people forget about SMEs. I think, there's a lot of presumption that, cyber attackers are only going after your multinational conglomerates. But in reality, it's actually the smaller businesses that are the hardest impacted, based on not only if there is a cyber incident, the time to recovery and the losses are going to be a lot more.
They're softer targets.
Or
Exactly.
hospitals.
Yeah.
Hospitals,
exactly.
schools, universities, that's charities.
And they don't care who you are. What they care
No.
about is that you've got an open port and a vulnerable application that's accessible over the internet.
And a bit of money.
Too many of them are criminals, so their ethics are questionable in the first place.
To be fair,
some of them do have ethics.
Yeah.
There are still some honourable thieves, because I've seen reports of some apologising because they have hit the wrong target, so to speak.
That was last year, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it was at the hospital one, where the children's hospital, I believe.
Correct.
But I think cynical me would also say, though, that they don't want too much heat on their backs, and they were ransomware as a service vendor.
But that's what I mean about, they are pretty good at what they do, and they recognize a good PR opportunity, actually.
Yeah.
But you're right, it also meant the feds weren't on their back, because they weren't.
Yeah.
They had other
might
fish
trust
to
them
fry.
in the ransomware negotiation. But I think bringing up SMEs is really important, because we talk about advanced threats, and it is good it's a great way to have a conversation about cybersecurity. But these SMEs are starting from very low security maturity. And maybe one of the reasons I kind of have a gut reaction to seeing too much talk about AI is that I don't want to see these type of SMEs thinking they can AI their way out of security problems without people. When I started as a security operations center, it was automation that was going to take our jobs. And lo and behold, we just automated the tasks we didn't want to do anymore because they were taking too much time or boring. And then we moved on to higher value tasks like threat hunting or something.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing we need to remember, that these AI automation make people better. So if you can buy an AI model and try and work out how to make it security better, or you can look to a managed service provider that's going to give you a kind of instant level of security maturity and do the real bread and butter actions for you, in your environment. But
I can't think of who you might be referring to there.
Well, you have to get the one little plug. Yeah, Fortune have got lots of managed services when it comes to XDR, MDR, and WAF. We have lots of other stuff too, but that's my zone. But maybe a question for you guys is how do people get the most out of those managed service providers? Because I've seen it's about knowing where you're going to be better replaced, your internal security, if it's a one person or maybe an IT person who's wearing multiple hats, versus the service provider. And how does that relationship work, like in the optimum way, I guess?
But to add to that question as well, there's also got to be a balance, because a 4-person company versus a 25-person company, revenue is going to be different, the amount of cash is going to be different. At what point is it optimal to start using an MSP effectively? And I know there's not a black and white answer, but there's got to be, it's not as clear cut as I'm a 4-person consultancy, therefore I have to outsource, all of my security just so I can focus on everything, because that would bluntly be very expensive.
I'm quite a fan of the hybrid approach, where even if you've got an in-house SOC team, I think managed detection and response has the amount of value it can add based on, as I mentioned before, hopefully you're not dealing with thousands of sophisticated attacks a day, so you're not potentially getting as observant, for lack of a better word. But I think when you've got that second set of eyes and you've got a managed an MDR solution sat there that are either threat hunting on the back end or have their own indicators, that base of data that they're searching for and looking for, I think it's I always think of it as like a value add, or it's an enhancement for your SOC, because you've got your SOC doing what your SOC does, but then you've got this second set of eyes that's either looking for things that you're not necessarily looking at, or is again seeing a lot broader of a picture. So instead of just having a narrow view of this is our organization, they're seeing hundreds of organizations and going, well, actually, we've seen this in other environments. This could be X, Y, and Z. So I think it's if you can, again, there's obviously the cost associated. If you're already running a SOC and you have to bring in an NDR, then obviously that's an issue, but I do think that there's a value to a hybrid approach at least.
Yeah, look, I'm all over that, Mike. I've been a fan of the hybrid approach for 10 years and more. It worked very well for me when I was Group CISO, building our own in-house SOC, working with a third party who we eventually bought, actually, to bring that capability
You
in-house.
liked it so much, you bought the company.
Well, because we saw commercial opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was it was almost, it wasn't quite flippant, but it was definitely not a formal conversation meeting I had asked for. But I just happened to catch the CEO and CFO in, I think the CEO was actually in the CFO's office, well, not the other way around. But I think they were actually talking golf, if I remember rightly, as I walked past. So I recognized the opportunity that it wasn't a serious conversation. And I just happened to stick my head round the door because we'd been looking at costings and what we still needed to do and all those sort of things. And I made the comment, we're spending a lot of money with this third party. I happen to know they're up for sale at the moment, and our business was in the acquisition mode. And they thought it was a good idea, and we ran with it. And 4 months later, they bought one of the leading. I am going to name them. They bought Context IS and brought it in house. And what was really interesting was our chairman at the time was the former CEO of BAE. And I know I'm quoting names here, but it's historical and actually it's factual too. And his charge to us was, don't do what we did to Detica. So one of the things that was one of the successes, and you can perhaps get Mark Rayburn to talk about it from the context side of the game. There were two things that he liked about coming to us. We said to him, you can keep your own brand, which is as simple as my outfit's color at the time was blue, context was red. Context we were able to stick with red. It sounds really simple, but to the people within context, it was actually quite important because it was a signal of their continuing independence. And you have to watch that when you, at a big level, when you start buying up, because we've all seen examples of too many leading outfits that have then got swallowed and lost. And I'll just name Portcullis for one. And I know I'm showing my age. But sorry, the point here to SME, to your question, Tom, I think it's really difficult for the SMBs between the 10 staff and 100 staff.
Yeah.
I think above 100 staff, it becomes easier to start contracting with a managed service provider or a managed security service provider. The real commercial challenge is between that 10 staff, when you basically just need somebody to run IT, and you can get away with firewall and antivirus, which today is an MDR. That's probably enough if you're in the Microsoft stack and you've got E5 licenses so you can tap into it. I think you can get away with that. Simplistic, I know. The challenge is in that 10 staff to 100 because they're not quite big enough. There are some exceptions. If you're in the pharmaceutical research and you're well funded, you can probably throw money at the problem. But if you're not, I don't know, what would be a good example these days?
Just regular
an accountancy outfit.
Yeah.
Actually, all right, professional services. They do what they do, and this probably applies to lawyers and somebody in the health service, be outside of the hospitals. Somebody in that space who's more than just a small practice. That's a real challenge because they probably don't even have an in-house IT team. They certainly won't have an in-house IT security, cybersecurity specialist, or probably don't. They might have an IT person who is interested. That starts to be where they're on a path to a better place. But sorry, I don't mean to monopolize it, but I think that 10 staff to 100, I think that's a challenging space if that's where your business is.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're drawing to a close now. We are just a few minutes left. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to give our audience our standard piece of advice. We do have a few minutes, so you got sort of 30, 45 seconds, something like that. So the standard question, as many of you will remember, is what should our audience members do tomorrow when they get to their desks? Assuming they're not American, because they'll be away on Thanksgiving, or in the shops, one or the other. what should they do when they get to their desks to actually start the needle or move the needle on security operations? I'm going to start with Mike.
I think it's just go back to the basics. Obviously, we were touching on advanced threats, but most of these advanced threats start at a very low level of, vulnerable application, phishing email. And I think it's people get blindsided to the APT high level attacks. And I think it's just remembering the basics and getting your sort of low level drills right, because that'll help a huge amount up the pipeline.
Yeah. And what sort of, when you say focus on the basics, just elaborate on that a little bit.
Instead of getting all drawn up in, nation state actors, looking at building that security culture within your organization, I think the human element doesn't get touched on enough. But at the end of the day, the employees in an organization are the front lines. If they're
Yeah.
clicking on things or downloading things or, engaging in email chains, having them with that culture, they go, oh, actually, this doesn't seem right. I'm just going to let security know. It can save you a whole headache and a whole incident if you
Yeah.
catch it at that stage, as
Yeah.
opposed to when the sort of blinky box goes off and it's like, okay, now we need to work out what's gone
Now
on.
we really are in trouble.
Yeah.
Very good. Alan.
I'm absolutely going to go with the basics, but can I add to that? Because actually, my call immediately before this was with a client who's in the 50 strong space.
Right,
They've
smack in
they've
the middle.
they've just gone with an MSSP first time. They're 3 weeks into the rollout, and we were just running through progress. We got our first month's review with them next week, and it was MDRs moving along well. They've now got the detection agents rolled out to endpoints and to most of their servers, but not all. They've got their vulnerability management agent onto all of their servers, bar two, but only as recently as yesterday. That took a little longer than we wanted. They're starting to look at their process, their patching process, because they're going for Cyber Essentials Plus. So
Yeah.
they've got to be able to hit it within 15 days and evidence that they can. And I said, okay, what are you doing about your automated processes? So, for example, you come back from holiday and you've been away since before Christmas and it's now day 8 and there's been a patch available from day 2. So you're already 6 days into your 15.
Yeah.
How are you going to do it? And we've got some work to do there. But actually, that then led to the next question of we need to tackle our backups because we haven't got backups, nor have we got restore capability across the space. So there's always something to do, but you've got to look at those basics, unfortunately. There's no getting away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And finally, Josh.
Sure. So to try and not answer and say do the basics, I say use these advanced types of attacks are really
I did
great
use some
having...
specifics, Josh. I didn't generalize.
But you're absolutely right. I agree with you guys. But these advanced conversations about advanced threats are really great to have that security conversation. But don't leave yourself feeling futile that because there's these sophisticated threats out there, there's nothing we can do. Remind yourself, how much of a risk is that actually to me? And then think, okay, what actually is higher on my risk kind of appetite list or lower, whichever you look at it. And bringing everyone in that security conversation, right? Use these interesting stories to tell them about it and then teach them something that maybe feels a bit more mundane about MFA or device policies or what you're kind of encouraging them to do on their side, because the entire organization, not just IT and security teams, can be part of a strong cyber resiliency program. And I think those are the organizations I see the best at doing that. Bringing everybody in, having a simulation. It doesn't have to be a full red team if you're not at that level of maturity. It can be as simple as faking an incident and kind of seeing how we respond to it, so that when a SOC analyst calls you up and says, hey, I've just seen this compromise on your network, here's what you need to do, they aren't going, who on earth are you? What are you talking about? And they're kind of ready to go, because time really is of the essence. If anything that we've seen with automation and AI and whatever they've used and specialization, they're getting quicker. And so we need to be able to respond and contain these threats to effectively reduce that impact and get back up and running.
Brilliant. Thank you, folks. Mike, Alan, and Josh, thank you very much for your time today, your wisdom, charm, charisma, and knowledge, all of which has come together to help us all out here. Thank you, all three of you. To our audience, it's not that I'm angry, I'm just very disappointed that we didn't get a question. But then again, with Alan on the call, we could hardly get a word in edgeways anyway, so it's not really surprising. It's lucky I know Alan. Do not forget to join us next week where we have a topic, well, which everybody will be talking about in December, the emerging 2025 threat landscape. So this is our futurist look at what's going to be happening next year. It is on Thursday, the 5th of December, same time as usual, 1600 hours. And without further ado, one final thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
My pleasure.
And thank you to our sponsor, Josh.
Yep. Thank you very much for having us.
And to our audience members, stay secure, my friends.